Chapter 777, The Seals of Time and Space. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. Since he had called out Zhang Yuochen by name, he must have known Zhang Yuochen's identity without a shred of doubt. There was no need to use a disguise anymore. He asked, "How did you recognize me?" Zhu Yui's face was absurdly handsome, fair complexion, delicate features better looking than a woman's, and long black hair tied neatly into a sleek ponytail, which exuded a nonchalant and carefree demeanor. "You are the time and space descendant. I suppose you've heard of Maitreya?" said Zhu Yui. Zhang Yuochen's heart skipped a beat. Legend has it that Saint Monk Zumi was the Maitreya. Though he died a long time ago, he controlled the power of time and therefore made many imprints on the future. Tens or hundreds of thousands of years from now, we might be able to bump into one of his imprints. Zhang Yuochen's gaze grew intense, and a sudden thought hit him. He then darted his gaze to Zhu Yui, looking dazed, and asked, "Could it be that you've met Saint Monk Zumi before?" Zhu Yui laughed and nodded gently. "I got to meet Saint Monk once when I was 12, and I was his apprentice for a month." Indeed, he had met Saint Monk Zumi before. His moves were instantaneous yet seamless. Zhu Yui's smile faded and his eyes pierced through Zhang Yuochen's, two of his fingers extending into a sword sign and thrusting towards Zhang Yuochen at a lightning speed. In a split second, his right hand was already pointing at the middle of Zhang Yuochen's forehead, giving the opponent no sign of his next move. The aura energy of his sword surged through his fingertips and formed into the shape of his blade in a white beam. It was the basic move of Sword of Time, the instantaneous sword technique. However, Zhu Yui's sword-like fingers halted immediately when they were only 3 inches away from Zhang Yuochen's brow, unable to advance any further. Zhang Yuochen calmly sat where he was, placed the wine glass on the jade table, raised his arm, then motioned downward with his palm. Bang! Zhu Yui was knocked back a step or two. Zhu Yui looked at his own palm, then at Zhang Yuochen's. Astonished, he asked, "Was that spatial freezing from the power of space?" "You're right," Zhang Yuochen answered. "You have not perfected the Sword of Time. Otherwise, even with the power of space, I wouldn't have been able to defend myself." Zhu Yui did not seem particularly concerned. He said while laughing, "My sacred mark of time and space is not opened, nor does the Sword of Time serve as my primary sword technique, so of course the move would not be perfect." When Saint Monk was imparting the techniques of Sword of Time to me, he continued, "he meant to have me experience different sword fighting styles. That's about it. Had I performed Sword 3, would you have been able to take that? I suppose spatial freezing has its limit too? You have mastered Sword 3, haven't you?" Zhang Yuochen lifted his eyes to meet Zhu Yui's for a moment. With a tone of pride, Zhu Yui answered, "Though not mastery yet, I have achieved a desirable level." Of course, Zhu Yui intentionally concealed his true strength, just as Zhang Yuochen expected he would. Others thought that he had not even mastered Sword 2. Who would have guessed he had in fact reached a desirable level of Sword 3? Comparatively, Zhu Yui's talent had surpassed the Sword Emperor's when the Emperor was his age. If Zhu Yui truly was Saint Monk Zumi's apprentice, everything would make sense now. Zhu Yui understood the power of time and space well, and had never fallen into everyone's belief that the time and space descendant was dead since the beginning. His pursuance of Huang Yanshan could be bait meant to get Zhang Yuochen to reveal his true identity and meet him in person, because Huang Yanshan was Zhang Yuochen's fiancé. Anyone who claimed to be Zhang Yuochen's adversary, or intentionally approached Huang Yanshan, could be the assumed identity of Zhang Yuochen. Recently, Zhang Yuochen's action had made it even more obvious. Not only was he covering up for Huang Yanshan everywhere, he had been appearing at the mansion of Sword Saint Xuanji several times. How could people not be suspicious? Of course, the most important thing was that Zhu Yui knew Zhang Yuochen would not die so easily, while others firmly believed in the news of his death. This was the main difference that made Zhu Yui the only one who could identify Zhang Yuochen, while others could not. Like how Kong Lanyu believed that Zhang Yuochen had died 800 years ago, she wouldn't have given up her doubt even if Zhang Yuochen were to reveal himself now. Conversely, Orange Star Emissary knew that Zhang Yuochen was not dead. Therefore any blunder would blow his cover, as Lin Yue and she would be able to identify him immediately. Perhaps the Orange Star emissary was smarter than Kong Laniu. Zhang Yuochen glanced at Zhu Yui and said, I'm more curious on knowing how you captured the time mark to perform the instantaneous sword technique. Fiddling with his nose gently, Zhu Yui laughed. I've told you so many secrets, shouldn't it be your turn to answer my question? What is it? Zhang Yuochen replied. Zhu Yui asked, why did the Queen order your arrest and have Wan Zeoi execute it? Zhang Yuochen seemed calm and responded with a slight nod. Hasn't this been announced by the Imperial Court already? I am guilty of committing the unpardonable crime of slaughtering warriors from the Ministry of War at the battleground of Thousand Void World. Sigh. Zhu Yui heaved a deep sigh and said, I trusted you, so why couldn't you? Can't we be truthful between the two us? Honestly speaking, your situation at that moment was an insignificant matter to the Queen. The Ministry of War could have sent anyone to arrest you. Why would the Queen give this order herself? Zhang Yuochen replied, if that's the case, what other reason do you think it could be? Zhu Yui stroked his chin gently. When news of the time and space descendant Zhang Yuochen spread to the Fragrance City, I got suspicious. Thereafter, I purposefully went through all of the old documents to find out the relationship between the time and space descendant and the Queen, and I actually got some useful information out of this. If this were to fall into the hands of others, the Imperial Court would have had it destroyed. Yet the city of Wangxiang chose to keep it. Zhang Yuochen's facial expression remained unchanged. His gentle smile was still playing on his lips. Zhu Yui continued to stare at Zhang Yuochen, hoping to get some clues from him and thus probing further. I managed to find out that the name Zhang Yuochen was the exact name of the Crown Prince of Sacred Central Empire 800 years ago. In addition, the Queen had an unusual relationship with the then Crown Prince at that time. Was that a coincidence? But other than this relation, I could hardly think of other reasons that could make the high-status Queen give the order personally to seize an ordinary warrior from Heavenly Realm. Zhang Yuochen lifted his wine glass to his lips and answered, perhaps the Queen had the same thought as you. She felt that the name Zhang Yuochen had offended her, and therefore decided to sentence me to death. Zhu Yui frowned for not being able to pick up on anything despite his long stare at Zhang Yuochen's expression. He nodded. If that's the case, the name Zhang Yuochen must have meant a lot to the Queen. I guess it's your turn to answer my question now? Zhang Yuochen asked in return. It was actually very easy to perform the instantaneous sword technique. Zhu Yui held his right hand out wide, palm up, and rested it on the jade table. His holy chi flowed rapidly atop his palm and formed into a white seal. The time seal, said Zhang Yuochen. In the middle of the white seal, there were thousands of time seals overlapping each other, gleaming faintly from the power of time they collectively produced. Thereafter, Zhu Yui drew out his left hand. Surprisingly, there was another seal on his left palm. The space seal, said Zhang Yuochen. Zhu Yui withdrew his hands from the table and nodded. The time and space seals were gifted to me by Saint Monk Zumi. He said that sword masters could only unleash their strongest power with the help of the power of time and space. But it requires immeasurable holy chi to activate the time and space seals. That's why I am envious that you have opened the time and space mark, which allows you to have full control over the power of space and time. Having the time and space seals put Zhu Yui at an advantage compared to the others, because the power they contained were equivalent to 2 drops of divine blood, which were condensed and purified into the 2 unique sacred seals that would only bring endless benefits. Zhang Yuochen nodded in reply. I see. So, what is your intention in meeting up with me? Didn't I mention this at the beginning? What other intention would I have other than having a drink with you? Zhu Yui pointed to the wine on the table. Zhang Yuochen glanced at him and stood up. I'm leaving now. Farewell. Zhu Yui replied. Zhang Yuochen headed straight to the exit of the carriage, then paused and said, thank you for the drink. He then left quickly. In the carriage, a graceful and gentle lady walked towards Zhu Yui and helped him fill his glass with wine. She asked softly, Sir, is he the time and space descendant Zhang Yuochen, as rumor has it? Zhu Yui laughed and said, oh beautiful, and the rest of you, listen. As you have heard, not only does this matter involve Saint Monk Zumi, but the queen is involved too. It is for the best for you to forget everything you have heard. If word spreads, no one can save you from that. Terrified by his words, all sword servants in the carriage knelt before him. One of them asked, "So, is he an enemy or a friend?" Zhuai took a deep breath followed by a nod. A strong rival. Whether he was an enemy or a friend, Zhuai did not provide a clear answer.